What's up, football world? This is the Bucky Brooks Show, and I am Bucky Brooks. We're coming off of a very exciting draft weekend where we saw 257 guys hear their name called, realize some dreams, going to teams. And as much as I want to celebrate the 257 guys that are going, I don't think it's fair to talk about the draft without talking about the biggest story that really hung over the draft the entire weekend, which was Shedeur Sanders and the slide that Shedeur Sanders endured over the course of the weekend. Now, I think it's important that we give it its proper context and make sure that we understand and respect all of the other players. And we'll talk about all the other players at another podcast or whatever, but it's important that my first time coming back and being able to address it, that I can address everything that we now know about the Shedeur Sanders slide and why it ultimately happened. And the best way that I can describe kind of like the cause or the root of the slide are a few different reasons. One would be the talent didn't necessarily meet the tolerance that teams had. Secondly, not participating in the process cost Sanders an opportunity to go much higher than he could have. And then the third thing, and one of the biggest issues, would be the Coach Prime effect. And so we'll examine all of those things. And then at the end of the show, I want to talk about the quarterbacks that were picked and talk about how they fit and how I can see them having success at their new destinations. But back to Shedeur and what happened over the course of a weekend where we thought he would be celebrated and hailed as a first-round pick. And what I would tell you is Shedeur Sanders on tape, to me, was a pretty solid prospect. He was someone who didn't necessarily rate out as an A-plus arm talent or an A-plus athlete, but there were times where you saw him play at an A-plus level. Part of that was supporting cast with Travis Hunter, number 2 overall pick in the draft. Some of that was also his ability to play within a system that set him up for success with isolation routes and throws over the middle where he could throw with touch timing and anticipation. All of those things were good. As a player, he certainly, to me, looked like a bottom of the first round talent, someone who could be a starter in this league, someone who needed all the stuff around him to be right. But I could envision him being a Jared Goff, Geno Smith type quarterback. Now, to do that, he needed to fully go through the process and prove to people that he could be that player. Now, one of the things that I can tell you about as a former player and a former scout, the process is everything when it comes to the draft. We can talk about how someone looks on tape and evaluate the tape and those things, but you got to remember, teams don't meet players until the calendar flips in January. And even then, we're talking about a very limited window where teams can get to know a player. That window typically is All-Star Game, Combine, Pro Day, and maybe the top 30 visit. Well, in each of those situations where you can get to know a player, I would say that Shedeur Sanders failed the process. And the reason why he failed the process was not necessarily all of his performance during the process. He didn't participate in the process. So let's break down where he didn't participate. Shedeur Sanders was invited to play in the East-West Shrine Bowl. As the marquee player there, the expectation was, hey, he'll practice, but maybe he won't play, but he'll practice, and scouts will have an opportunity to see him outside of his normal setting. They will have an opportunity to see him coached by coaches that are not his dad. They will see him in an offense that has pro concepts that would enable us to evaluate him, see him, and confirm or question some of the things about his game to help us make that evaluation. Sanders decided not to participate. And in not participating, he prevented himself from really making a strong impression to scouts about what he could be at the next level. But that's okay, because we've seen people elect and move out of the All-Star Game process and it not become a detrimental decision. Well, the next event, the next tentpole event where people could meet Shedeur Sanders was at the NFL Combine. He would have an opportunity to work out in front of all 32 teams, every decision maker in the building, and every coach in the league. would have an opportunity to see Shedeur Sanders throw the ball against his peers and contemporaries. We saw Jackson Dart and Tyler Shutt and Jalen Milroe and all those guys elect to throw the ball in front of everybody, even Will Howard, who some would say may have had the worst throwing exhibition that we've ever seen, he participated in the process. Shedeur Sanders didn't participate in the combine. He just elected to interview with teams. He didn't work out, didn't do those things. And look, that's his right. It is optional if you want to throw or not. But I can tell you, when it's very tightly contested for pole position, if you're competing with a bunch of dudes and they grab the ball, they have an opportunity to leave a lasting impression on evaluators when you decide to sit on the side. The other thing, when it comes to the interviews at the combine, there was talk and conjecture about Shedeur Sanders not interviewing well. There were reports that came out. We heard Todd McShay. We heard others talk about the interactions maybe not being the best with Shedeur Sanders and others at the combine. Now, remember, I've told you that there are only a handful of touch points where teams can get to know prospects. The combine is like the biggest one. In fact, the combine is the one that we kind of count on the first interaction between team, decision makers, and prospect. So it's a big deal when you have an opportunity to sit in front of the decision makers and to make a favorable impression to them as you're seeking to be the face of a franchise. Some would say that Shedeur Sanders might have misplayed his situation, didn't understand where he really sat on draft boards, and didn't fully engage in the process when it came to the teams he talked to, the number of teams he talked to, the way that he presented himself in those meetings. Now, he won't be the first person to have either bombed meetings or not live up to expectation in the meeting. But as a quarterback, the standard is so high in terms of what they need to be able to do and what they need to handle as the face of the franchise. If I could tell you the way that we used to talk it in the scouting business, we would say that the franchise quarterback needs to be presidential. He needs to be someone that you can see with a regal presence, that he is the embodiment of what this franchise is about. Well, for us to make that determination, we have to interview him. We have to feel good about the way that he interviews and comes off. And we have to be able to rubber stamp and be like, oh, no, he's solid. He loves ball. He loves all these things about it. And football is the main thing. It's not a part-time thing. By not fully engaging in the process, Sanders opened up questions about how would he be as the face of the franchise. It's not the end of the world, but it rubs some people the wrong way. And now you're beginning to get a drum beat of like, hey, what's going on? How do we feel about this? Is he really in it? Is he not in it? All of those things. But you still can't ignore it if the talent is at a level where you're like, the talent is so good that we can tolerate a prickly personality. Let's think about Aaron Rodgers and how Aaron Rodgers has been maybe the last decade of his career. Not always the easiest to get along with, not always the greatest guy, but because he was so talented, you tolerate it. The same would be said for Shedeur Sanders if the talent was up there. And I'm saying he was a very good player in my estimation, but teams are now beginning to weigh the talent versus how much are they going to tolerate for someone who's been a non-participant in the process. Within Big 12 Pro Day comes and he elects to sit on the side. He doesn't participate in that. I do some interviews with him at NFL Network, but he doesn't throw. He just kind of walks around, kind of does his thing, which is fine, supports his teammates. So you see that part of it. But what you don't see is you don't see him throw the ball around and do that. Now, some of the guys that went to the combine didn't participate in the Big 12 Pro Day. Some of the guys did. It's all on you, but we've gone months now. We're now in March. We've gone 3 months without seeing Shedeur Sanders throw the rock. And so the longer you're away, the more people can now become attracted to other options who are steadily participating in the process. We saw a guy who was unheralded, not really talked about, and Tyler Shutt begin to gain momentum in scouting circles because he was a willing participant in everything. Bowl game, combine, those things, interviewed well, crushed it, despite being a guy that I would say, like, look, he got beat out at Oregon. didn't play well or have an opportunity really to play at Texas Tech because of injury, goes to Louisville, plays 2 years. And look, he came on his final season, but a 7-year player that we're just talking about. But because he did the other things right, people were willing to forgive some of the things that showed up through his playing career because they fell in love with the guy. Shedeur didn't allow people to fall in love with the guy because he didn't participate in the process. Well, now let's move ahead to pro visits and top 30 visits. And now you have an opportunity to sit down and sell yourself, right? And before that, he showed up. He had a showcase at Colorado. People got a chance to see him throw it around the yard. He did his thing. We saw it. It wasn't the greatest pro day workout, but it wasn't the worst. It was solid. Like, that's the best way to do it. Ball fluttered on intermediate stuff, threw the deep ball well, but we had a chance to see him, and that's the first time we've seen him since the bowl game where they got absolutely crushed, and he didn't play great in that game. So now we wrapped up all of the physical portion of it. The only thing that's left are the visits where you can sit down and talk to the teams, eat with people, get really, really comfortable with people. But at the same time, you get a chance to go through a sample install, meet with people, and do all that other stuff. And by all accounts, like, this is public. People talked about that didn't go well for him for some teams. Some people felt like he didn't take the process seriously. Some people felt like they called him on it, didn't respond well. All those reports that are out there. I wasn't in the room, but I can only go by like what I hear and how you kind of put it together. And some of the conversations that I had wasn't great. And so now that part isn't great. So when we look back and we talk about the process, what was great about his process? The talent was good, but the process was terrible. So now if the process is terrible and we know we don't play a game from the end of the season to the draft, you've now failed the areas that create an opportunity for you to build momentum heading into the draft. Think about this as being a civilian going for a regular job. Well, when we go for a regular job, we've always been taught, hey, put on your blue suit, make sure you have your tie there, show up early, research the company that you're interviewing with, make sure you know who your boss is, make sure you know any other people that you might interview with, any touch points, have a little information on them. Because what you want to do is you want to put your best foot forward and make them feel comfortable about bringing you on board. Shedeur Sanders didn't make them feel comfortable about him coming on board. Now, let me talk about this because I think it's important, because there have been all these dynamics where people talk about it being a racial dynamic and all of these things. And look, I'm not one that believes that racism doesn't exist. I don't think this was a racial thing. I think this was a misunderstanding from a prospect who didn't fully understand the process and didn't fully put together a plan that would allow him to shine during the process that's really, really important for some teams. That's what I would say it is. The other part that I would say impacted the slide when it came to that is the talent. As I take you behind the curtain when it comes to the draft room, when you look to the left, there's a vertical board. That vertical board may have 150 of the top prospects ranked from 1 to 150. That board is just whatever the grades are, we rank from 1 to 150, and whatever you sit in, that's wherever you're slotted, that's where you're at. On the other side of the room, there's what we call the horizontal board. That is broken out by position. And so you have quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive tackle, guard, center, all of those things all the way across the board. Defense will be on the other side or whatever. We're just focused on the offense. So now what happens is we have the vertical board that has everyone ranked from 1 to 150 by grade. We have the horizontal board, which has everyone ranked according to grade and round value. So if we think about 7 different blocks, where the first round block is at the top, and depending on where the grade is, you can be at the bottom of the block, the middle of the block, or the top of the block based on grade. So let's just say Shedeur Sanders was at the bottom of the block in the first round. Well, now in day one, if he was graded like that on your team, and remember, all 32 teams grade the player differently based on their own set of criteria and how they see the talent. Well, if Shedeur Sanders is at one block and this team may need an offensive guard and the offensive guard has a higher grade, they go with the offensive guard. That is for a lot of these teams that had already solved or semi-solved their quarterback situation. They didn't need a young quarterback. So when he began to fall, there were teams that didn't view him as the superior talent, where you have to leave your ideology behind, your ideal, your philosophy behind, to take the quarterback in Shedeur Sanders. Because now you're grading the talent, his talent versus the talent of another person at a position of need. I'm gonna go with the other person at a position of need who might be more talented. So that shrinks the number of teams that are available for Shedeur. And as you're going through the process, and now that you fall out of the first round and day 2 is coming around, and Tyler Shutt goes to the Saints, and that's another opportunity that's closed off. And the Seattle Seahawks go and mess around and they get Jalen Milroe in the 3rd round, and you're looking around like, hey, what's going on? Now there are no other teams that truly had a real need at quarterback. And because you didn't participate in the process, or you made people feel some kind of way with the way that you interacted with them in these meetings or whatever, now you don't have anyone that wants to save you, because they love you, they trust you, believe in you, and they think that, hey, even if we have a good situation, this dude is so good that he's going to find a way to make it. You boxed yourself in because you haven't fully engaged in the process. So that's part of it. We can talk about on field, the evaluation, the talent, and those things, because that impacts the grade. Look, very good, not elite. We talk about, everyone is talking about arm strength, athleticism, all those things took a number of sacks and all that. But when protected and playing on time, really good player. Probably the best processor player of anybody in the class. When he's protected, he's going to throw the ball on time, touch time, and anticipation, all those things stand out. And I don't care what anyone tells you, when you look at the tape, those things show up. But because he's more of a dinosaur at the position, and people want the shiny things like the guys that are dominating at the top of the food chain. Who are those guys? Pat Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, MVP types. Those guys are all athletic, all with what I call superpowers, all with elite traits. Shedeur Sanders doesn't have any of those traits. And so when teams are looking for the franchise player and they're comparing Sanders to the elites at the position, they have to figure out how someone who doesn't have superpowers can match up with these superheroes that he's going to face off, because we got to get past the superheroes to get to the Super Bowl. That's just what it is. So now the number of teams that want him and his style shrinks even more. So now let's take that. You have a small pool, you have non-engagement in the pre-draft process, and then you have what everyone will call the Coach Prime effect, meaning Coach Prime is a Hall of Fame player, great coach, but a star power galore when it comes to what he was able to do as a player, what he was able to do on TV, how he continues to command attention. Man, even though he hasn't played in like 30 years, he's still viewed as that guy. Well, that comes with a lot, because he is flamboyant and swaggy and all of those things that he is, because that is part of what has made him great when it comes to being a marketing bonanza away from the field. Well, some people are worried because he's had success as a coach at Jackson State and now at Colorado. He's always coached his son. Man, if I bring his son in, does this mean that he is going to come for my job? Either directly or indirectly, based on his perception on how his son is either utilized, given opportunities, and those things. A strong coach, that won't bother. But any coach with some insecurities about his job, his situation, his relationship with the ownership, why would I want to engage in that process? So now you have all of these things where we can kind of point to where you're saying, man, like the process is not being great. The tape is solid. The talent is above average. Far more negatives than positives when it comes to the evaluation. That's why you sit here and you look and you're like, man, we're in the 3rd round, we're in the 4th round, no one's pulled the trigger. Then you get to the 5th round and you're like, man, is he going to fall all the way out? The one thing that we knew is that the Philadelphia Eagles are a quarterback factory, and perhaps they would have been the team that ended the slide if the Cleveland Browns didn't jump ahead of them to take the quarterback. We'll never know, but that was certainly a possibility given the way that Philadelphia wants to be a quarterback factory. take the quarterback, develop the quarterback, flip the quarterback for a top pick. That's how they operate. Maybe Sanders is going to be that, which makes it very interesting for Cleveland to jump ahead of the Eagles, because the Browns not only bypassed Sanders a million times, they took a quarterback in the third round in Dylan Gabriel. The quarterback taken in the third round is expected to make the team because the first 3 rounds of the draft are traditionally locks to make the team, especially at quarterback. Well, now you've created this weird dynamic where you have the third round quarterback who's a lock to go in, but you got Shedeur Sanders in the same room. You've traded and acquired Kenny Pickett from the Philadelphia Eagles, and you just signed Joe Flacco as an emergency guy. Well, now you're looking at 4 dudes, and that doesn't even include Deshaun Watson potentially walking around, popping in and out as he rehabs. You're now talking about 5 dudes, but really 4 competing for maybe 2 spots, maybe 3 spots. Let's be generous. But when you look at it, this has become the hardest situation that Shedeur Sanders has ever had to navigate in his playing lifetime, because he doesn't have a golden parachute. There's no one that can save him. The only person that can save him is him based on how he plays. He is now engaged in a battle. Take Joe Flacco out, because they know what Joe Flacco can do based on how he played coming off the couch to help them. Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders are in a 3-way battle for potentially 2 spots. What we know about Dylan Gabriel, unless he messes this all the way up, he's going to be there because they gave him enough money to keep them there. So now this battle comes down between Kenny Pickett and Shedeur Sanders. Kenny Pickett, the former first-round pick who's bounced around two stops from being the starting quarterback in Pittsburgh, to Shedeur Sanders, who was expected to be a first-round pick, but now is in the 5th round. How does Shedeur manage that when he comes in as QB4, QB5 on the team? Can he roll up his sleeves and get grimy and dirty and take the job? Because right now, without the leverage of being a top pick, look, man, the Browns aren't tied to anything Sanders related. He has to earn the right to be on the team and then to be in the rotation as a potential starter. Now, if he does what he's supposed to do and you look at the talent, you would say that he has more talent than Dylan Gabriel, but Dylan Gabriel has more trust of the coaches based on how he participated in the process. Sanders must earn that trust and then take over the job with his talent. Can he do that? Only he knows how he handles that, which is why this is such a fascinating thing. But it's one of the things that we had to talk about coming out of this draft. Why does Shedeur Sanders slide? What does it mean? And can he get back up? Look, I'm confident that he can get back up and make it happen, but he has a long road to hoe to be able to get to the point where he legitimately can compete for the starting job. We'll see how it works out for him. Now, before we go, I want to talk about the other quarterbacks, because I feel like these other quarterbacks literally lived in Shedeur Sanders' shadow the entire weekend. And I won't talk about everybody. I just want to talk about the top ones until we get the Sanders, because I think, to me, that makes sense. Cam Ward going to the Tennessee Titans. Bravo. I love it. I love it because with Cam Ward, we talk about the tools, the talent, the toughness, the tenacity. He is very much like Steve McNair when Steve McNair was the quarterback for the Titans. Physical, rugged game, but man, superior arm talent. makes the throws easily. You love what he brings to the table. You can build around it. Jackson Dart, bottom of the 1st round, going to the Giants. This is really interesting in terms of why Jackson Dart was the pick at the bottom of the 1st round. For reference, Joe Shane, Brian Daboll worked together in Buffalo. Quarterback in Buffalo was Josh Allen. The quarterback in Buffalo was a true dual-threat quarterback who was rugged enough to make things happen as a runner, but talented enough to make things happen as a thrower, in the pocket, outside the pocket. When the Giants looked at the quarterback class and they looked at Jackson Dart to them is a version of Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts, a dual-threat quarterback. Physical, can run it, can make plays, tough as nails. Everyone raves about his toughness, even his teammates, because we talked to a bunch of them throughout the process, and they all co-signed on him being a dude. The thing that also helped Jackson Dart convince the Giants that he was the right guy for them, go back and listen to the phone call that Brian Daboll and Joe Shane made to Jackson Dart after they picked him, and how both of them, Daboll and Shane, said, man, we just love how you crushed the process. We love how you went about your business. And that's what swayed him that he was the right guy. Now, remember, early in the show, I talked about the process and how Shedeur Sanders didn't participate in the process, and that hurt him. Jackson Dart's participation in the process helped him because he did everything, and every step along the way, he improved throughout the process. So going through the process isn't about displaying perfection, but it's displaying the courage to participate and to hear the feedback so you can get better. Jackson Dart doing that has helped him with the Giants, and the Giants will take what they've learned from dealing with Josh Allen, what they learned from dealing with Daniel Jones and having him lead them to the playoffs, and they'll put together a plan for Jackson Dart to be successful as a dual threat quarterback. Don't know how soon it'll be, but man, there's going to be pressure to get him on the field because these guys on the hot seat, given the last few years, and the Giants falling behind the division. Jackson Dart shouldn't start from day one, but man, somewhere in there, if Russell Wilson falters, the door's going to be cracked for Jackson Dart. Good situation for him to be in because he has people that absolutely love him and have experience building around his skill set. Tyler Shutt going to the New Orleans Saints. This was interesting because this had been the conversation a few weeks leading up that Tyler Shutt could be with the Saints. Not at 9, but somewhere maybe in the first round or second round, he would be the guy for them because the synergy, the connection between Kellen Moore, who Kellen Moore has coached, and what Tyler Shutt is as a player. Tyler Shutt is gifted as a player, tall, prototypical size, very good arm talent, athletic, all of those things. Man, it is easy to fall in love with him, particularly if you spend some time coaching Justin Herbert and those things. They're not quite built the same, but they may have similar intellects and those things. Man, Kellen Moore can sit there and look. Hey, Tyler Shutt is an older, experienced player, 7 years of collegiate experience. It matters in some positions, not this position, but we can find a way to work around it. More importantly, I can build around him, and I can get him to be our starter, particularly with Derek Carr sideline. The connection between Kellen Moore and Tyler Shutt was apparent and obvious when they talked to each other at the presser. They challenged him. He responded. He's been open about the adversity that is faced and how it has impacted his game, while also displaying the potential to improve steady over time, which made him the pick at that point. Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is so interesting because I don't know if there's a more talented quarterback prospect in the draft. And what I mean by talented, I'm just simply talking about the tools. There's no one that runs like him, and there's no one that can exceed his deep ball prowess in terms of how he pushes it down the field. There are a lot that can become better intermediate passers in those things, but at the best, his best of best, or when he's at the best version of himself, elite running skills and elite arm talent as it relates to pushing the ball down the field. If you're the Seattle Seahawks, you're intrigued because you just don't see guys his size run 4.3 like he did at quarterback. You also don't see guys run power and counter like he did at quarterback with the kind of success that he had. Worst case, what you're thinking is maybe we've uncovered a Taysom Hill type player that we can maximize in a bunch of different ways to take advantage of his athletic talents and his tools. 2, we may have an athletic quarterback to really develop behind the starting quarterback and Sam Darnold and work behind Drew Lock until he's ready to maybe move up to number 2 or number 3 based on anything that could possibly happen. What you've done and taken a super athlete, a stud athlete in Milroe, you have created the opportunity to do so many different things to get him on the field, to maximize his point scoring potential while also developing as a player. And he also eases into a lineup where he doesn't have the pressure to perform right away. You think about Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, and him, easy peasy situation for him. He can come in and concentrate every day on getting better. And the team would tell him when he's ready to have an opportunity more so than him dictating to them. Final one before we get to the Shedeur pick was Dylan Gabriel coming off the board for the Cleveland Browns. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. The Gabriel pick surprised me because he's so undersized. He's so small. He's so tiny. But, man, you can't dispute the production. Everywhere he's been super productive. UCF, Oklahoma, Oregon, throws it all over the yard, terrific teammate, well prepared, well spoken, a lot of positive traits, particularly if you're going to be a backup quarterback. This is a dude who is going to be given an opportunity to start. And he's going to be given an opportunity to start in a system that has elevated Kirk Cousins and made him a viable option at starter. This is a great chance for Gabriel to knock that out and make it happen for himself. But he's going to have to be able to do it knowing that competition is hanging right over his shoulder. And trying to go throw for throw with him and Sanders is going to be interesting because it is going to be a very competitive environment. And how do they get together? Gabriel has to still win the job from a rookie and then kind of knock off a veteran, even though in my mind he's guaranteed to be there. How people respond to pressure will ultimately determine how they play under pressure in games. And that should be a good thing for the Browns as they look at their quarterback situation with Gabriel and Sanders as two rookies vying it out for a major bone and being a contributor to a team. And so we'll wrap it up there. We talked all about quarterbacks. We gave you 30 minutes of just quarterback talk in this draft. There are others, but I wanted to focus on those guys because I think those are the guys that have a realistic opportunity of making an impact. I wanted to break down all of the things that I've seen in the Shedeur Sanders slide that I wouldn't say warrants him being the fifth round pick, but I can see why he was a fifth round pick. Next time we come back, we'll review the draft. We'll talk about the hot points, what the draft is about, what we learned from it, and all of those things. But until then, make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to shout out to all my Believe colleagues because they're doing great work for their respective teams and sites. And lastly, make sure you come back to the next Bucky Brooks Show because so we can continue to grow the community. Until then, I'm Bucky Brooks, and I'm out.